everyone, my name is Austin, and hey, I've been using Linux for about 2 to 3 months now, and honestly, I think I have a pretty good grasp of Linux. At least, the more friendlier Linux OSs, right? The first Linux distribution that I've been using is called Linux Mint, and it's a really popular first recommendation for Linux beginners and people who are really tired of Windows 11, bloatware, spyware, or people who are really tired of their Macs and they really want to, have a lighter, awesome, OS, right? A lighter, awesome OS. And Linux Mint is a really great distribution that, it feels like Windows. It's very familiar to people who have used Windows, but also at the same time, it is a really great introduction to Linux. That being said, though, I decided to distro hop. To another very similar Linux distribution called Ubuntu. Ubuntu is also known as a very, very beginner, very friendly Linux distribution that is known to just, use graphical user interfaces more than command lines, which people are really scared of. And now that I've tested out both of these Linux distributions, I would like to give my thoughts on which Linux distribution is truly the better one, right? So before we begin, here's a disclaimer that I have to give. This is the computer model that I'm using, that I've tested both distributions on. So my experience, right? My experience of using these two distributions will be slightly different than your experiences of using these two distributions. Because different Linux OSs will work differently with different hardware. Yeah. It's a very flexible, it's a very unique, very unique operating system. And to be honest, no Linux machine is exactly similar. Yeah. With that being said, let's talk about these distributions. So, first, let's talk about the desktop, right? The desktop. Unlike Windows, where, everyone's desktop is going to look the same pretty much, right? The taskbar is probably going to be down underneath, right? Down bottom, and when you click on the Windows logo, a pop-up's gonna show up where you can search your files, search your apps, this and that. On Linux, there are desktops, right? There are desktops, which the best way to describe desktops is kind of like themes, almost, if you will. Your graphical user interface is gonna slightly depend, right? For example, if you use a GNOME desktop, it's gonna look a little, weird, right? But if you use a Cinnamon desktop, it's gonna look very similar to what a Windows user interface will look like. And that actually leads to a very good segment. Linux Mint uses Cinnamon, which is very Windows-esque, right? Very Windows-esque. I know that Linux Mint also has XCFE, and Mate, Linux Mint Mate. But for the purposes of this comparison, I will just talk about Cinnamon only. So the Cinnamon desktop is, it's very clean. It has all the very essential Linux apps, LibreOffice, Libre, whatever, Excel sheet, whatever the heck. And it has these apps that are pre-programmed in to help make your life a little easier. And obviously it has the software manager, where you expect the software manager. And overall it's got that very nice similar Windows feel, right? Well, Ubuntu, it's a very interesting desktop interface, right? It's a very interesting desktop interface because I don't know. I would say it's very similar to a Chromebook. It's very similar to a Chromebook's desktop interface. If you ever used one of those before. At least in my opinion, anyway. At least in my opinion. Ubuntu's desktop is known as GNOME, and Linux Mint is known as Cinnamon. So yeah, in terms of favoring, which desktop interface is better, I'd say Cinnamon is better in my opinion, because as a Linux noob, right, as a Linux, newbie, I really like that, I really like that interface. I really like it. It really speaks out to me, and it's like, you know what? It's very comfy. It's very, it's very inviting, and it doesn't scare me too much, right? As someone who's only dived in for about like 2 to 3 months, it's a really nice feeling. That being said, though, I don't necessarily hate GNOME. I don't hate it at all. I think it's pretty good actually. But if I had to prefer which one over the other, I would say Cinnamon, definitely. And so I'd say Linux Mint gets 1 point for that. And in terms of using both of these distributions, right? These OSs. In terms of similarities and differences, I'd say there's more similarities than differences, right? Like, both of these distributions are based in Debian, although technically Linux Mint is based off of Ubuntu, but Ubuntu is based off of Debian, so both of them, they share a history, right? Both of them share a history, and both of them, they're very easy to use. Both of them, you can just use their software manager, right? Both of them, you can just use their software manager to just download your favorite app off the software manager. It's like having an app store, right? So if you don't want to use the command line, you go just do that. But sometimes I do want to use the command line. And when I do use the command line, both of them are very similar because both of them share the same commands. Very, very similar commands. So, I mean, that stuff I can't really judge, right? That stuff I can't one of them is clearly better, one of them is clearly not. Because both of them are, both of them have practically the same feel, right? Both of them, they kind of work the same. But this is where I have to give Ubuntu a point because of a couple instances where Steam worked better in Ubuntu, right? Linux Mint, right? Linux Mint, I download, the official Steam download off of Steam's website. It works, but then when Steam trying to log me in, all of a sudden the app kind of just crashes or something, and the Steam application mirrors my background, and I can't even see the Steam application with I can't see anything, right? I can see my library, but I can't access my library because I can't see shit. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's I think it's a driver thing or something like that, a graphical driver thing. But Ubuntu, I had no problems with, right? I had no problems with. I download Steam, right? I download Steam off the software manager, off Ubuntu software manager, and it works like a charm. Yeah, it works like a charm. And also, I do want to mention, preface that, I downloaded Linux Mint off of Steam. It didn't really work out, so I tried downloading Linux Mint off of its own, software manager, its own app store, and it still didn't work either. That's why I'm making that comparison of software manager and or Ubuntu software manager and Linux Mint software manager, because both of them suck. And I went to Ubuntu software manager and Steam actually worked. I did not see any mirroring or whatever, but Mint, both both this official Steam thing and both the Linux Mint App Store, both Steam applications kind of ran like ass. And Ubuntu, whenever I did when I did download from Steam's official website, right? I downloaded Steam's official download off the website. It ran pretty bad as well, in my opinion. It was really hard to figure out how do I use the Debian version on Ubuntu? But like, yeah. So, in conclusion, don't download Steam off of Steam's website, because on both distributions I've had a horrible time. But in terms of like their app stores, right, Linux Mint's app stores and Ubuntu's app stores, Ubuntu takes the win for me because it actually worked. I can actually access games, and I got to play, Bloons Tower Defense 6. You know what I mean? I got to run that off natively off of Linux, and it was a great feeling. So Ubuntu definitely gets 1 point off there. And okay, so now we got in terms of let's see. In terms of support, right? In terms of support, hardware support, driver support. Both these distributions, right? It's going to be dependent, right? It's going to be dependent off of what your hardware is. That's why in this video I talked about, me using an IdeaPad 115 AMN7. Yeah, because yeah, you know what I mean. Like that's why I did the disclaimer, because depending on what device you have, the score will change, right? But in this case, I will have to give it to Ubuntu, because Ubuntu, it just works like a charm. I do the setup installation. I do the, I do the installation process, and my Wi-Fi drivers work, my sound work, my camera work, my USBs work, right? My USB ports work, my charging works. Like everything works, right? Everything works. Linux Mint for the most part was very similar. But right away, when I installed Linux Mint, it did not recognize my Wi-Fi. You know what I mean? So I had to find for about like 5 or 6 hours, right? I had to find the correct, I guess, command line to run, so that way, Linux Mint could detect my like Wi-Fi adapter in my laptop or some shit. And honestly, that was so painful, because it was my first Linux distribution, right? So I was sticking with it, and my goodness, I had to like plug in my phone, right? Plug in my phone to my laptop, give it some of that juice, give me some of that hotspot tethering. You know what I mean? Get some of that tethering, and I was trying to stay up all night trying to find the correct command line to type in or to copy paste, and it was, I don't know, it drained the soul out of me. And I was able to get the Wi-Fi working, but it was a horrible experience as well. It was not good. And also, when I tested the camera, initially, obviously this camera is not effective because this was a Windows laptop, and it was running fine, right? The camera was working fine on Windows, right? But whenever I got Linux Mint, the camera was, it wasn't working. It wasn't detected, right? The camera wasn't damaged. Linux Mint just could not read, right? It could not, right? It couldn't pick up on the webcam, right? And it couldn't find the webcam driver. And I was not, for the love of me, right? I for the love of me was not going to spend another 10, 20 hours trying to find the right command line to fucking get this thing to activate and all that stuff. But Ubuntu, the Wi-Fi setup was good. In fact, it gave me the option to, check to see which Wi-Fi I wanted to use to install it. So that was a huge win. And the camera works right off the bat. I did not need to, activate this, that. I did not need to do that. Right? I did not need to do that. So Ubuntu for the win. But honestly, this is going to depend on your hardware, and you shouldn't really count this category. I'm only putting this category in because, well, I'm sharing my experience with you guys, right? But if you want to but yeah, don't take it too seriously, right? This category, because it's just gonna be all hardware stuff. And obviously, if you have patience, right? If you have patience, you can find the correct command line to activate, certain parts of your computer if it doesn't work out or whatever. If you're patient, then both these OSs are going to be fine for you. But for me, I was like, oh, I felt so relieved if I did not have to like grab a certain, I had to grab a certain, what do you call it? I didn't have to grab a certain, command line to just activate a certain driver or whatever. Or mess around the BIOS to get secure boot off or on. Like thank God, like I'm good. Okay, I'm good. And yeah, so it was a very interesting experience. And I'd say the last thing is I want to talk about is like opportunities, right? Opportunities. And what do I mean by that? It's like apps and shit, right? Because like there are gonna be certain things that like one distribution is gonna do better than the other, and so I want to talk about that here. So in terms of like like getting like apps and getting like the ease of use of getting apps, stuff like that, not off the software manager, but more like online, right? Like in terms of like command lines, right? Like which distribution can you like download easily, right? Download easily off the command line, right? The command lines that you find, like which one is easier? Well, both are very similar. I would say I'd give this to Ubuntu as well, because it just supports better, right? It supports better. Like if you go to like you download like a certain like Linux, right? A certain Linux what is it? A certain like Linux app or something, application online. Typically, you'll always find Debian or Ubuntu. It's like usually a Debian/Ubuntu or Ubuntu command lines for you to run. That way you can download this particular Linux application, and like don't worry if you want to use if you want to use this particular Linux application but you don't have Ubuntu or Debian or whatever, you can still run it in Mint because Mint is based on Ubuntu, right? So you're not missing any key features or some shit like that, but you might have to add on to particular things, right? Because Ubuntu likes to use snaps, and Linux Mint has snaps off by default, for example. So you're gonna have to do like extra steps in order to like download this particular Ubuntu command line, for example, right? To use this particular Ubuntu command line. But Ubuntu's got snaps, it's got like whatever the fuck, right? Because like this is like a command line that works perfectly for it, right? But others like other distributions that are based off of it, like Linux Mint, they might have to do some loopholes, might have to do a couple little things here and there in order to get this particular command line to work and download. So yeah, Ubuntu is still better in that regard. But yeah, overall, yeah, this entire review, I'm like glazing Ubuntu. I'm like basically sucking it off. But both these Linux distributions are really good. Both these Linux distributions are really, really good. And if I really had a complaint for Ubuntu, and you know what? Here, I'll give one point to Linux Mint. Another point is Ubuntu, I would say, freezes up on me sometimes, right? Whenever I'm like doing a particularly hard task or something, or I'm like running like multiple different I'm splitting different different screens, right? I'm splitting multiple sites. I'm like I'm like adding 2 or 3 sites together, or like I'm doing some coding. Sometimes it like freezes up on me. Like it freezes, it like turns off a little bit and then it comes back on and then it starts working again. Mint is very stable, but I'd say Ubuntu is less stable. Both are very stable Linux distributions. Both are very stable, but Linux Mint is more stable in my opinion. But yeah, overall, both these Linux distributions are really good. They're really fun to use, and if you really don't, like Windows right now, why not? Why not hop on to these Linux? Why not hop on to these Linux distributions? Why not? Right? Give them a chance. They're beginner friendly for a reason, because even I can use it, right? Sure, you have to use a couple of command lines here and there, but for the most part, it's just like using any other operating system. It's great. Honestly, I recommend both of these I don't hate one over the other, but I definitely do prefer Ubuntu. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!